When I was looking at today, it was interesting because today, if you notice, the celebration that we have is not the 32nd week in ordinary time like we would typically have, but instead we're celebrating this feast of the dedication of the Basilica of the Lateran Basilica, and many of us might not understand what that is or why that's significant. Quite honestly, so the church that we're celebrating the dedication of is the St. John Lateran Basilica, which is in Rome. So the first thought that I had when I was looking at today's readings, I was like, what do people in Thibodaux, Louisiana care about a church that happens to be on the other side of the world, right? This past summer, myself and a handful of students from here and a few students from around the country with our focus missionaries, we did a pilgrimage to Rome, actually. And if you would ever take a trip to Rome, what you'll do is that typically they'll have 4 churches that they'll be sure to visit. The first one is St. Peter's Basilica. That's the really big one. If you type in Vatican Church, that's the big one that shows up, right? Big colonnade in front, big dome, right? Whenever the Pope is elected, that's the one that they walk out in front of, and they're smiling, and yes, yeah, hi, yeah, and they're scared out of their mind because they just got this responsibility, and please no ever, for God's sake, no, not me, right? But like, there's like, so that's the first one, right? You see St. Peter's Basilica, biggest church in the world, absolutely beautiful, absolutely stunning. When you walk in, all you can do is look up and just say, wow, right? So that's the first one. The second church that you'll probably visit is a church called St. Paul outside the wall. It's a basilica that is dedicated to, you guessed it, St. Paul, right? The apostle to the Gentiles. And it is outside of the original wall of the Vatican or the walls of Rome, right? The third one that you'll probably visit is St. Mary Major, which is, again, a church that's dedicated to Our Lady. It's the biggest church in the world that's dedicated to Our Lady. Really, really beautiful, really, really amazing, right? Again, another stunning, oh my goodness, biggest church you've ever seen. The fourth one that you'll probably go to is this one, is St. John Lateran. It's a church that's dedicated to St. John. It was given, the land had been taken from a family called the Laterini by Nero, and then was given back to the church to be able to build the basilica. The thing about this one, the interesting thing, and the most important thing about this, is that this is the Pope's church. So whenever we say that the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, this is the Cathedral Church of Rome that we're celebrating today. And while it might seem like, okay, that's not a big deal, those other 3 churches, as beautiful and as significant and as powerful as they are, all of them are something in the range of 700, 600, 500 years old. The church we celebrate today is 1,700 years old. So this dates back to whenever Christianity became legal in the Roman Empire. So a little background, if you've taken a Western Civ class recently, this should be a review. If you haven't, then welcome. We're going to teach you a little bit about Western civilization, right? Christianity comes in place, right? Jesus shows up, incarnation, death, burial, resurrection. People start to believe Jesus. We hear it throughout the Bible, right? The first couple of 100 years of the church, it spreads, but it's all underground. So when people get together and they celebrate Mass or they celebrate the Lord's Supper, right? When they celebrate the Eucharist, a lot of times it's either in hiding or it's in homes. So, for example, they would celebrate Masses in the catacombs. They would celebrate Masses in these rooms that were dedicated in homes to the church, right? And it was this kind of underground hush-hush kind of thing because the church was being persecuted for the first few centuries. Well, as the church is being persecuted, but it still continues to grow kind of underground. We get to a point in roughly around 300 AD, the 4th century, that the Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity. And there's a big old story and a beautiful story about his conversion. Well, as he converts to Christianity, what happens is that when the emperor does something, all the people of Rome do the same thing. So he converts to Christianity, and in 313 AD, what he does is he declares this Edict of Milan, which makes Christianity legal in the Roman Empire. Not only is it legal, but he becomes Christian. So what happens is the entire Roman Empire very quickly follows suit, because you don't want to do opposite of what the emperor is doing, right? So the entire Roman Empire follows suit, and not long after that, you have the kind of time of the quote-unquote Holy Roman Empire. Well, in 313 is when the Edict of Milan and Christianity becomes legal. What happens is that Christianity now comes out of hiding. That the celebration of Mass, that the celebration of the liturgy, all of a sudden now is something that's more publicly accepted. And that's whenever Constantine gives this plot of land that had been confiscated from some early Christians back to the church, to the Vatican. And when he gives this back to the church, he says this is where the Pope, he needs a suitable place. He needs a place to celebrate Mass. And in 324, the church that we celebrate today is built. 1,700 years ago, this church was built. And over the time, it's been expanded, it's been changed, there's been some kind of like updates and different things like that. But if you walk in, it is a stunning, beautiful church. A couple of highlights of it, and when we were there as a group, again, it's one of those churches you walk in and you just look up. Wow. I remember when I walked in the back doors of the church, lining the main body of the church where the pews and chairs would be. What happens is that along the walls there are these marble statues of the apostles. And these marble statues are about 15, 18 feet tall. So they're about as big as our crucifix on the wall. And there's 12 of them, all the apostles. Some of them, like St. Peter's holding his keys, and St. Paul is pictured with the sword like he typically is. Some of them have the instruments of their torture or their martyrdom. One of the saints, I want to say is St. Bartholomew, is actually holding his own skin because he was flayed alive, right? It's a really, really beautiful kind of expression of the faith and the tenets and the pillars of the church, the apostles that it's built upon. Then as you get a little bit further in, what you see is you have the main altar, and above the main altar, there is this reliquary, and it's believed to hold bones from both St. Peter and St. Paul. It's parts of their skull. And the reason why we have that is because St. Peter, right, the rock of the church, the foundation of the church, the sure foundation that we're built upon next to Christ, right, the first pope, that Peter is kind of the rock that stabilizes the church. And then St. Paul is the first big missionary, writes half the New Testament, right? So not only do you have the foundational element of the church, the strong element of the church, the unchanging element of the church, but then you also have the missionary, the one who goes out and proclaims and spreads the gospel, the evangelization side of the church. That there's a both and in the church. Beautiful symbolism that's in one building. As you look around, all the way against the back wall of the church, there's the cathedra. And the cathedra is basically the bishop's chair. Only the bishop sits in that chair. If you go to St. Joseph's in Thibodeau or you go to St. Francis in Homa, you see a chair that is just reserved for Father or Bishop Simon Peter, because it's the bishop's chair. Well, the bishop of Rome is who? The Pope. So that chair is for the Pope and the Pope alone. That is the chair. So all of these things are powerful and all these things are beautiful. But I remember when I was a seminarian, one of the classes we had to take was on art and architecture. So as I was walking through, it's cool to be able to kind of read the church, right? You can see what is the kind of style, and the pillars, they mean something, and the mosaics, they mean something, and all this stuff. And a church like this is dripping with symbolism because it holds such a powerful and profound place in the church. It's got such a historical significance. That class, though, I'll be honest with you, while it was something that makes a beautiful church come alive, I go to St. Joseph, and it seems like there's something else that pops out every time I go. At the same time, it can also ruin churches for you. Because not all of our churches are so what we would call beautiful, right? Some of them are a little bit ugly, right, to say the least, right? We've been in churches where we're looking at it and we're like, what in the earth were they thinking when they did that, right? Go pray before the statue of Mary. There's 27 of them. Which one do I go to, right? All these kind of things. There are certain things, as a seminarian, I remember, I was kind of proud about that. I was very, very I am very, very judgmental when it comes to churches, right? Pray for me, please. I need it. But I remember I was having a conversation with a couple of friends one day. And I'd taken a class, so I know just enough to get myself in trouble, right? So I'm expressing my opinions, and I am tearing down this one church. And I'm like, it's terrible, it's ugly, da-da-da-da-da, it looks like this, it looks like that. And I'm going through all these different things and being critical. And a buddy of mine overheard the conversation. And he looks at me and he says, man, you got a lot of opinions, don't you? And at that point, it was one of those things, it's I don't have opinions, I have facts, right? It was that kind of thing. So he looks at me and says, you got a lot of opinions, don't you? And I was like, well, it doesn't follow, and I'm giving reasons and all these things. And he looks at me and he says, that's interesting. He says, you know what's crazy? That God still dwells there even though it's ugly. He said, in fact, God wants to dwell in you even despite your sin too. Man, leave me alone, like it was one of those times where like you get told something, I feel this big and I walk away like head down ashamed, but I'm like, but I was right, man, that church is ugly and it's all this stuff, right? But what he was saying was true. And it's so true that it's actually in our second reading today. That same idea. This is the first words of the second reading. Brothers and sisters, you are God's building. Then it follows up, St. Paul follows up. Do you not know that you are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? Do we recognize that? The thing is that churches, whether it be modern, whether they be old school, whether they be really old, whatever they are, right? Like, they are holy not because of the paintings. They are holy not because of the furnishings. They are holy not because of what relics might be there or not be there. They are holy because He's there. It doesn't matter how aesthetically pleasing a church is. First and foremost, Jesus Christ is at the center of it. That's what makes the space holy. Now, some make it a little bit more conducive to prayer. But ultimately, what makes a church holy is the fact that Jesus Christ is there. The same goes for us. And I think that's what St. Paul is touching on today. What he says is that you are a building of God. You are God's building. You are a temple of the Holy Spirit. You are the one, like you have God's divine life within you right now. By virtue of your baptism, you and I have divine life of the Lord in us right now. How do we do to keep up the space, if you will? Do we let it get dirty and gross? No upkeep? Do we let it get cluttered with all kind of things that aren't important? Or do we keep the space a place that is dignified well enough for God to dwell there, to be exalted, to be seen? You see, what Jesus talks about in our gospel today, what we hear about Jesus in our gospel today, I think is a little bit different than what we might typically think of. A lot of times when I hear today's gospel, when I hear people reference today's gospel, we hear about the money changers and the people who came into the temple area, and then Jesus got angry, and right, it's justified anger. And basically we use this to kind of like to kind of write off the fact that we get angry most of the time, right? Even Jesus gets angry, and he's flipping tables and making a cord and going whip people, right, and all this kind of stuff. So like, because I flipped the bird at somebody who cut me off in traffic, then Jesus got angry too and is justified and whatever. No, that's not what Jesus is saying today. What Jesus is doing today is he's seeing an injustice, particularly around the temple of God. So the design of the temple, the way the temple was structured, the way the temple was built, there were these areas of the temple, right? The most intimate and close area, the most closed off area, the most private area was called the Holy of Holies. And that was at the center back of the temple, right? Only the priests went there. And it was only at certain points of the year that they would go there to offer sacrifice. In the Holy of Holies, there was a menorah that basically would be a lamp that they would give light. There was an altar, and there was the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant held the Ten Commandment tablets. It held some of the manna from the desert and held Aaron's staff. So basically, the Ark of the Covenant for the Jewish people was the presence of God himself within that ark, within that place, right? What we believe in the Catholic Church is that we have a new Ark of a new covenant, and that's the tabernacle. So in the Holy of Holies, it was only the Ark of the Covenant, only where a priest would go. Outside of that was a place called the Inner Sanctuary. And that Inner Sanctuary was a place where people come to pray. It was only Jewish people that were allowed there, and they would come in, and that's where they would come to offer sacrifice. That's where they would come to offer prayers. That's where they would come to sing the psalms. That's where they would come to read the scriptures, right? This was the place, the Inner Sanctuary. That's where they could come. Then on the outside of the Inner Sanctuary, there was this place called the Court of the Gentiles. This is where anybody could come into the temple. And right outside the temple was basically a marketplace. Because what had to happen in the temple, there was nothing that was unclean that could enter the temple. There was nothing that was idolatrous that could enter the temple. So what had to happen is that people needed to exchange their currency. Because if they went to pay the temple tax, or they went to put money into the temple collection, essentially, they couldn't do so with the Roman currency because it had the face of Caesar on it. And that was seen as a sign of worship. So they had to go and they had to exchange money. So that's why we have money changers, right? And then on the outside, there were also doves and goats, and there were doves, goats, lambs, all the things that needed to be used for sacrifice. That was all on the outside of the temple. Because people that might have been traveling a long way weren't going to bring a lamb and then try and figure out how to keep it from breaking a leg or being some kind of blemish when they needed to offer an unblemished lamb. So what would happen is that farmers and shepherds and people like that, they would offer the stuff outside the temple for sale that you could then buy what you needed to, bring it in, and then offer your sacrifice. What Jesus is angry about today, what he gets upset about, is not that these things are there, it's that these things have moved into a place that doesn't belong to them. That these things outside, the money changers, the people selling the livestock, the people selling the doves, they've moved into a place that is not theirs. It's not what's supposed to happen. They're desecrating a sacred space by making it a place of commerce. It's not that the market is bad. It's that the market is not what we're supposed to focus on when we're in the temple. Now, what does that have to do with us? Whenever we look at ourselves as the temple of God, how often do things of the world, things that cause us strife, things that cause us to lose our peace, things that cause anxiety, things that get us angry, how often do those things find their way in to places they don't belong? How often do they find themselves becoming the focus of our life? Way more than they should. This is the thing. None of those things are bad that are in the market. None of those things are wrong that are in the market that we talk about in our gospel today. They're simply misplaced. There's an old adage that I remember hearing one of my professors say at the seminary. He said, man is made for worship. We're going to worship something. If it's God, great. That's who should be the end. That's who should be the focal point of our worship. But if not, we're going to worship something else. Something is going to order our life. Something is going to become the top priority. Something is going to be the main thing, our main focus. And the thing is that if it's not the Lord, then our worship is misplaced. It might be success. It might be success in the classroom, success in the business world, success on a field, success in a club, whatever it is. It might be success. It might be approval. I just want to be accepted by the people around me. I want people to think I'm good. I want people to think I've got my stuff together. I want people to see me as good or as competent or as trendy. It might be comfort, whatever it is, right? Like, I just want to be able to kick back and relax and be like, oh yeah, share Instagram posts that I look messy enough, but like I don't care, but I spent 45 minutes making my hair look that way, right? Like, how often is it that these things, they creep in? They become the focal point of our life. They become the focal point of what we do. They become the focal point and the priority that everything else falls behind. Most of the time, they're not bad. Most of the time, they're simply misplaced. Success is not bad. But faithfulness is better. Acceptance is not bad, but being devoted to the Lord is better. I think a place for all of us to reflect on today. It's not just because there's a church on the other side of the world that we're remembering, but for us, what's the focal point of my life? And what are the things that compete for my attention? What are the things in my life that compete for my top priority? What are the things in my life that I continue to go back to that pull me away from prayer, pull me away from like the time that I know I'm supposed to be spending with God, or the time I know I'm supposed to be spending like reflecting on the Bible or reflecting on the gospel, or pulling me away from like something as basic as saying I'm going to go to Mass every week? What are those things that pull me away? Because just like Jesus did, that's the stuff to drive out. That's the stuff to push away. Because, Lord, I want to be focused first and foremost on you. Today as we come to Mass, tonight as we come to Mass, name the thing that competes for your attention. Name the thing that competes for that top priority. And ask the Lord, Lord, drive it out. Put it back into its appropriate place so that I can first and foremost focus on you and respond to your love. We will worship something. Man is made to worship. But as St. Paul said, do you not know that you are a temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? And we live a life that keeps God in his right place and magnifies him with everything that we say and do.